Kurt Busch unfortunately has missed the past 5 races due to injury. With the playoffs right around the corner, and with Busch's Toyota teammate Martin Truex Jr. currently outside the playoff picture, could Kurt Busch choose not to use his playoff waiver? That's the question Denny Hamlin is trying to answer right now. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric. Welcome to Out of the Groove. I hope your week is going great. A couple different stories to touch on today. First, it's Tuesday morning as of the time I'm recording this. Today and tomorrow, NASCAR has a test scheduled at Martinsville Speedway. Almost every single chartered Cup Series team will be present at this tire test. A few teams, including Hendrick, Penske, Trackhouse, plan to give all of their drivers some seat time over the next 2 days. Other teams like Joe Gibbs Racing are only bringing some of their drivers. They're bringing Denny Hamlin and Christopher Bell. The tests are going to be going on today and tomorrow, so if any big news comes out of it, we'll talk about it later this week, but just wanted to let y'all know that's happening. Of course, NASCAR knew they needed to do some additional testing at Martinsville after the spring race earlier this year left a lot to be desired. Sounds like they're going to be testing a completely different left side tire, maybe something else, who knows. Let's hope and pray it creates a better product than what we saw in the spring. That's all I'm looking for. It's Martinsville Speedway, the paperclip, the half mile of mayhem. How can you mess that up? I don't know, I guess this season's been extremely unpredictable in a variety of ways. Speaking of unpredictability, let's move on to our next topic. This past weekend, Jim Utter at motorsport.com reported that Aric Almirola would return to the 10 car for Stewart-Haas next year, a 1-year deal with Smithfield in tow. Almirola, of course, was asked by reporters Saturday and Sunday about his NASCAR Cup Series future, and he said that he's not yet made a final decision. That motorsport.com report from Friday said that an official announcement would not be coming for maybe the next couple of weeks, but Almirola makes it sound like nothing is even signed just yet. He could just be saying that. Obviously, don't want to announce something before you make it official. Smithfield, SHR probably have a huge reveal planned out or in the works, so you don't want to go out and just nonchalantly mention it during a press conference if you don't have to. I don't see any reason to doubt Jim Utter, motorsport.com's report, but I guess until we hear it straight from Aric Almirola himself, that 10 car is not for sure locked up for next season. Another reason Almirola may have sort of ducked the question is because he doesn't want to think about this going into Daytona this week with a playoff spot on the line. One of his best tracks, a track that he's won at in his career. Aric Almirola doesn't want to be talking about reports of what he's doing next year. He wants to focus on Watkins Glen, I guess, which he struggled at, but more importantly, Daytona in a few days. I still think all the trends and reports lean towards him returning to the 10, but we don't know for sure. Just wanted to provide an update for you guys on that front. Now let's talk about something really interesting. Kurt Busch has been out of the 45 car since Pocono, where he suffered a concussion during a crash in qualifying. NASCAR granted him a playoff waiver, which they're known to do whenever a driver has to miss a handful of races or more due to injury. His brother, most notably, in 2015 missed the first 11 races of the season. He got a playoff waiver, he came back, went on a tear over the summer and during the playoffs and won the championship that year. Kurt Busch has that waiver. He won at Kansas earlier this year, and with no new winner this past weekend at Watkins Glen, he's effectively locked into the playoffs no matter what happens at Daytona Saturday night. NASCAR has not said for sure what will happen to that waiver if Kurt Busch doesn't come back come playoff time. Like, Kurt Busch has already said he's missing Daytona Saturday night, but we don't know about his status for Darlington a week later. It's not as simple as Kurt Busch waking up one day and saying, hey, I feel close enough to 100%, I'm gonna go for it. It's the playoffs, I can't miss these races. No, it's the doctor's call. Kurt Busch has missed these past few weekends due to the discretion of medical professionals. If Kurt Busch does not get cleared by a doctor, he will not race at Darlington. He will not race in any other races. And that's where things get super duper interesting, because right now Kurt Busch holds one of those highly coveted 16 playoff spots. But due to this unfortunate injury, he may not be able to compete. What complicates this even further is the fact that Kurt Busch is taking one of those highly coveted 16 playoff spots away from his Toyota teammate, Martin Truex Jr. That's right, the playoffs began today. Kurt would be in, and Martin Truex Jr. would be out, even though Kurt Busch may not be able to race at all the rest of this season. This is going to get really complicated, so try to bear with me. Reporters began asking questions this weekend at Watkins Glen. They turned to team owner Denny Hamlin, who owns 23XI Racing. Bob Pockris asked Denny Hamlin if there's been any internal discussion about refusing the playoff waiver, not using it. If Hamlin, Kurt Busch, 2311 turned down the playoff waiver, then boom, Kurt Busch is no longer eligible for the playoffs because he did not attempt to start in all 36 events. That's a rule. Which means instead of only one spot being available on points this weekend at Daytona, there would be two. And right now, Martin Truex Jr. would get that second spot. Things get even more complicated, bear with me. There are also two completely different brackets. There's driver points and there's owner points. Typically in the NASCAR Cup Series, both match up pretty evenly. It's more complicated in Xfinity and trucks because like in trucks, you'll have the 51 truck leading the owner point standings, but because Kyle Busch, the driver, isn't eligible to earn points in that series, he'll be way down the driver points charts. But in Cup, because most everyone's full-time, things line up pretty well. But if Kurt Busch were to let go of that driver waiver, 2311 could still hold on to the owner points. They could still be eligible for the owner's points championship. So Kurt could bow out of one bracket, but 2311 would still be eligible in this bracket. So they could put Ty Gibbs in the 45 the rest of the year, and he could run for the owner's championship. Okay, I'm so sorry. This is getting really confusing. Let me go back to Bob Pockris because he asked Denny Hamlin about this very topic. Has there been any discussion around doing something like this? And here's what Denny Hamlin said, quote, "Our team is in the playoffs no matter what. We just have to navigate it. But obviously, we're looking at all options." Hamlin's talking about the two different brackets. His team, 2311 Racing, will be in the playoffs no matter what. They have to decide, though, if they want to waive Kurt Busch's eligibility to kind of do a favor for Martin Truex Jr. potentially and Joe Gibbs Racing. Actually, not Joe Gibbs Racing, really, it'd just be for Martin Truex Jr., and his sponsors, I guess. God, I'm doing a really bad job of explaining this. It's very complicated. Dustin Long from NBC asked Denny Hamlin to elaborate further, and here's more of what Hamlin said. I mean, there's big financial implications both ways, right? For drivers and for teams. I don't know that I'd pull my team out of the playoffs. That's something they earned and Kurt earned. But obviously, if for some reason Kurt can't participate in the playoffs, then I think Truex would be the next one. Now he would be in, but Joe wouldn't be in. There would be two separate brackets. Unless Truex wanted to come over and drive the 45, then that would fix everything. Oh gosh, there's a lot of hypotheticals here. First question, can Kurt Busch race again this season? We don't know. Head injuries are not like a broken bone where, it'll heal itself over the next 6 to 8 weeks. Head injuries are very, very difficult to predict. At this point, it's a toss-up. It's 50-50. Either he will come back and race or he won't. It's impossible to predict. Denny Hamlin's in a weird spot here no matter what. Toyota would probably be pressuring him. Hey, even though we can't get, Joe Gibbs Racing in the owner's point bracket, can you at least put Martin Truex, help him have a better shot at making the driver bracket? Toyota's probably pressuring Denny Hamlin, but if you're Denny Hamlin, the driver, remember, Hamlin's an owner and a driver. That's so complicated. If you're Denny Hamlin, the driver, do you want to go up against Martin Truex Jr. in the playoffs? He could legitimately win this championship, even though he hasn't won a race this year. He's been a little up and down. I wouldn't want to bet against Martin Truex Jr. in the playoffs. So what's the incentive for Hamlin to make this decision? Is Kurt Busch comfortable making this decision? Because even if Kurt Busch can't come back in the first round of the playoffs, he could come back race 4 and still theoretically compete for up to 5th place in the final standings. Now, if he misses the first 3 of the playoffs, he's probably not getting to 5th place, but he could get maybe to 10th or 12th if he got really hot. He'd still have something to race for, so you gotta manage that incentive as well. It's really, really complicated though, and the problem is a decision needs to be made this week. Daytona this Saturday night on Big NBC is a marquee event. Right now, every fan understands the stakes. Blaney's the last guy in on points, but if anyone below him wins, they would bump him out. There's only one spot left up for grabs. That's the storyline everyone has been fed the past couple of weeks. Let's assume that nothing changes this week. We go into Saturday night's race with that same basic understanding. Let's say Ryan Blaney finishes 3rd, Kevin Harvick wins, no new winner, and Blaney's in the playoffs. The 16 driver field is set this Saturday night. And then, next week, on Tuesday or Wednesday, 2311 comes out and says, oh, actually, Kurt Busch, he's foregoing the waiver, he's gonna sit this one out. So hey, that means there's an extra spot. You can give it to Truex, the next guy on points, right? And then suddenly you have a new driver being added to the playoffs after the grid has already been set in front of a national TV audience. It'd be a replay of the whole Jeff Gordon being the 13th guy added to the chase fiasco a decade ago. I remember doing a video when I was 15 years old or something about that incident, and I was livid in the moment. I could not fathom why NASCAR made that decision. I'm not saying this would be as bad, But it would not sit right, I think, with the average fan. They'd see it as, oh, Toyota playing games with the system, trying to help their guys out, and doing things after the checkered flag never sits well with fans. That's why we started tearing down the leaders' cars at the track that night so we weren't encumbering wins 2-3 days later. People want to know who won the race, who's in the playoffs when they leave the racetrack, or as close to that time as they can. If Toyota/2311 is going to pull Kurt Busch's eligibility, they need to announce it this week. But it's hard to do because you don't know how healthy Kurt Busch is. Kurt Busch could be healthy after Daytona. He could be cleared to race Darlington and could go run for a championship. So you don't want to make the decision too soon. Maybe NASCAR has to make a decision here and say, hey, your waiver is only good up to a certain point. I don't know, maybe they have to put a deadline. It's also arbitrary because this is such a unique scenario. If this wasn't Martin Truex Jr. in 17th, a Toyota driver, say it was Chris Buescher instead, I don't think there's any chance Hamlin pulls their waiver. They, even if Kurt Busch is basically just a useless spot in the playoffs, they'd let him keep it. He earned it. Whatever. It's not helping any other Toyota drivers. What would be the point? I think NASCAR needs to go to Kurt Busch. They need to go to the doctors Kurt Busch is working with, and they need to sit down with them and say, hey, is there any chance Kurt Busch comes back the next few weeks? And if he's going to miss, they believe, at least 3 or 4 more races, I think you pull his waiver and you do it before Saturday night so that every fan watching on Saturday night on big NBC knows exactly what the stakes are. Oh, maybe there are 2 playoff spots up for grabs. Maybe Truex is in now because of this. If you give people the chance to absorb that information during the race Saturday night, I think it'll go down a lot easier than if you try to retroactively feed fans that info on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. That's all I'm trying to say. I hope this makes sense, but this is a really interesting scenario. I hate that Kurt Busch is missing the rest of the regular season, and I hate that his status for the playoffs is still up in the air at this point. But I think NASCAR and the teams at some point have to look at the bigger picture and make a call, make a decision before Saturday night. But I don't know, this is going to be an interesting storyline to follow over the next couple of days. Does a decision come down? Does it not? What's the storyline going into Saturday night? I hope NASCAR and the team get this one right. Share your thoughts down in the comment section below. It's very, very complicated. I hope I did an okay job explaining it. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. We talk NASCAR news almost every single day here on Out of the Groove. And as always, an extra thank you to my amazing Patreon supporters for going above and beyond to support the show. We'll be back again likely tomorrow. We've got more to talk about from this tire test at Martinsville. Any other news that comes down, we'll be here to discuss on Out of the Groove. Thank you so much for watching, y'all. I'll see you in the next video.